was a moonless night in the heart of rural America, and the silence felt heavy. Only the whisper of the wind and the distant hoot of an owl broke the stillness of the sprawling farmland. In the distance, the old red barn stood defiant against the inky black sky, a sentinel keeping watch over its territory. Little did it know, trouble was brewing. Out on the edge of his property, farmer Tom Foster tightened the latch on his front gate, unaware of the pairs of eyes watching him closely from the shadows. They had come under the cover of darkness, a ragtag group, whispering amongst themselves, fueled by desperation and a twisted sense of entitlement. The allure of Tom's fertile fields and storied barn had become irresistible to them, the promise of easy pickings, ripe for the taking. But Tom wasn't your average farmer. No, he had earned his reputation as a man who stood his ground. Generations of Fosters before him had battled storms, droughts, and desperate winters. This land was in his blood, and he would fight tooth and nail to defend it. The calm of the night belied the fierce determination within him, a warrior waiting to respond. As the shadows moved closer, creeping toward the barn, they thought they would catch him off guard. Little did they know, Tom had prepared for this moment. His instincts screamed danger. There had been whispers of trouble in nearby towns, thieves looking for easy gains, drifters with ill intent. He had seen it all and had fortified his property, creating a network of defenses that wouldn't be easily breached. Suddenly, they struck. A twig snapped underfoot, the sound piercing the stillness, causing Tom to freeze. He turned his head sharply towards the sound, eyes narrowing. The adrenaline surged through him like a wild river. He reached instinctively for the old baseball bat leaning against the door. It felt heavy in his hands, a familiar weight. Would it be enough? The thieves approached the barn, their murmurs betrayed by the low light filtering in from a nearby lantern. They were ready to break in, thinking they would snatch a few tools, some precious crops. They laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that cut through the night air. But Tom had been waiting, watching. He stepped out from the shelter of his porch, the bat poised like a knight's sword. The suddenness of his movement interrupted their laughter, mouths falling silent as they turned. The glow of the lantern cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the steely resolve in his eyes. Tom's voice boomed across the yard, echoing off the empty fields. The confidence in his tone was palpable. The intruders froze, caught off guard. They hadn't counted on facing someone who would stand against them. For a brief moment, fear flickered in their eyes. They were no longer just thieves. Now they were outmatched and outmaneuvered. The tension hung in the air like a taut string ready to snap. One of them scoffed, trying to regain some semblance of bravado, but Tom could see through the bravado. He didn't flinch. Tom said, taking one slow step forward. The bat rested comfortably on his shoulder, a sign of both defiance and readiness. His challenge hung there, suspended in the dark night air. The thieving group exchanged glances, uncertainty brewing, cracking their tough exteriors. Tom's unwavering gaze cut deeper than they expected. In that moment, their bravado began to falter, whispers of retreat passing amongst them. "I say we leave it," one muttered, glancing at the others. But the ringleader scoffed. "We came here for a reason, right?" He stepped forward, challenging Tom's resolve, but all he found was the cold steel of unwavering determination. "Real men don't take shortcuts," Tom fired back. "You want respect, you earn it." Each word dripped with conviction, a rallying cry that coursed through the stillness. The thieves were now a tangled web of conflicting emotions, fear, greed, and bravado battling it out within them. But Tom stood firm. In that moment, with the faint glints of moonlight reflecting in his determined eyes, he wasn't just defending his home, he was the embodiment of resistance. Suddenly, the farmer pivoted, sweeping the bat in a careful arc, positioning himself between the intruders and his barn. The message was clear, this was sacred ground. The ringleader hesitated, glancing back at his companions, visibly torn. Tom asked, his voice dropping to a low growl, every word weighted with authority. Finally, the ringleader seemed to sense that the gamble wasn't worth it. With a last defiant look, he spoke words laced with a mix of anger and defeat. "This isn't the end." Turning on their heels, the group fled into the darkness from which they had come, leaving behind their dreams of easy gains. Tom watched them disappear into the shadows, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away, leaving a triumphant rush in its wake. As they vanished, he lowered the bat and exhaled deeply. Sweat beaded on his forehead, the night air cool against his skin. Tom looked toward the barn where his entire life's work lay, his pride, his dreams, his family legacy. He had forestalled disaster, but in the back of his mind, a track of concern began to unravel. Would they come back? The next few nights passed in sharpened vigilance. Tom reinforced his defenses, laying traps around his property and readying himself for another encounter. He sought comfort in routine feeding the animals, checking the fences, repairing the roof of the barn. But somewhere deep inside, anxiety clawed at him. Each creaking floorboard of the old house echoed the uncertainty of what the future held. Then came the night that would test his resolve. The air was tense and charged, the wind whispering secrets as a thunderstorm rolled in. The skies crackled with foreboding energy, raindrops heavy as cannonballs began to strike the roof. Tom couldn't shake the feeling of dread creeping in again. Like the shadows he had faced, it lingered. As lightning illuminated the dark, he spotted movement beyond the edge of the fields. A figure tall and cloaked in darkness was making its way toward his home. The sense of unease trembled through him like a frayed wire, but Tom had not come this far to back down. His heart rattled in his chest as he grabbed the bat and stepped outside into the storm's ferocity. The rain whipped across his face, but he pressed on, focused on the fading outline creeping closer. Just as he reached the barn door, lightning ripped through the sky, casting the stranger's face into stark relief. It was the ringleader, soaked and miserable, but his eyes burned with a fierce vendetta. He taunted, voice barely audible over the raging storm. Before Tom could react, a handful of figures emerged from the darkness, an ambush materializing in the cascade of rain and flashes of light. The soft soil beneath their feet was saturated, and their menacing approach felt almost surreal against the backdrop of nature's fury. There was no time for fear. Tom stood his ground once again in that stormy chaos, adrenaline coursing through him, sharpening his resolve. The figures moved closer, a palpable threat in their shared stares like wolves baring their teeth. With a roar that echoed across the thrumming backdrop of thunder, Tom lifted his bat again. The torrential rain mixed with the sweat of desperation as he prepared for what was to come. You picked the wrong farmer to mess with. A flash of lightning illuminated the scene just as they lunged. Tom swung that bat, fueled by rage and love for what he'd built. The heavy wood connected solidly, and one of the intruders stumbled back, surprised and unprepared. In that moment, Tom saw a chance. He stepped forward, letting determination guide his actions. He shouted, "This is my land," and charged at the remaining shadows, staving off one intruder after another. The rain poured harder, the sky opened wide like a crying giant. The storm mirrored the chaos, the dance of man versus man, all amid nature's fury. He felt strained, every muscle aching, but with each lunge, with each swing, Tom found new strength. His heart hammered a war drum, pushing him forward. One by one, the assaults fell back. Tom was relentless, refusing to be stagnant in the face of danger. Desperate to defend what was his, he shouted, "Leave." Their bravado broke, and as they stumbled back, the ringleader's confidence wavered. The fierce storm mirrored their failures, driving them to retreat and disappear into the tempest, finally defeated. As silence returned, it felt almost unreal. Tom stood there, drenched from head to toe, bat still raised high, breathing heavily like a raging bull. He closed his eyes for a moment and exhaled, letting the weight of it all wash over him. The night had pushed him, turning the calm of a farmer into the tempest of a warrior. When he opened his eyes again, the storm began to ebb. The wind whispered other secrets, carrying away the remnants of fear. Tom learned then, not just about the invaders, but about himself. Sometimes, the greatest battles are fought not with weapons, but with the sheer will to protect one's own. The night resumed its stillness. The barn stood strong against the storm, and Farmer Tom Foster found peace in the heart of the chaos, a testament to the indomitable human spirit that thrived even in the shadows of threat. None would take his land, not as long as he stood ready, bat in hand, heart steadfast, ready to defend what he loved against anyone bold enough to try. The chill of the autumn night weighed heavy in the air as the moon peered through a veil of clouds, casting an eerie light across the expanse of the old farm. Silence enveloped the land, only broken by the soft rustle of corn stalks bending in the wind. Out in the fields, the shadows danced and not a soul dared to stir. But not all shadows were innocent. Some hid dark intentions. Tonight, invaders lurked, drawn by a singular desire: the treasures of farmer Jake Thompson's land. For weeks, word had spread among the restless, the hungry, and the desperate the Thompson farm held riches, not in golden coins or jewels, but in the life-sustaining crops, livestock, and the hard-earned legacy left by generations before him. Jake rested peacefully within the stone walls of his home, but beneath that exterior lay a man hardened by years of labor and love for his land. He had spent endless hours building it into something special. Every inch of this ground was sacred to him. And he knew well that when shadows crossed lines, trouble was near. As the clock told midnight, reckless laughter echoed through the stillness like thunder. 3 figures emerged from behind the rows of corn, their faces cloaked in darkness, eyes glinting like wolves on the prowl. They were armed not just with craving but with bravado, a dangerous mix that often led even the most foolish into peril. Jake awakened, jolted by the sound, instincts kicking in like a machine. He rolled out of bed quietly, every creak of the old wooden floor beneath him resonating through the stillness. His heart raced, pounding heavily against his chest, warning him. He grabbed his trusty hunting rifle, a family heirloom that had seen many seasons, but it wasn't just a tool for hunting. It was a symbol of protection. With silent determination, he glided to the window, peeking through the thin curtain. Outside, the scene unraveled like a movie reel. The intruders were making their way toward the barn, whispering and pointing. They thought they were unseen, unnoticed, but there was something primal inside Jake that awakened at that moment. He knew this wasn't just about defending his crops. It was a fight for his way of life. Jake tightened his grip on the rifle, mind racing. They underestimated him. They didn't know who they were up against. Years of tending the land and weathering storms had forged a fire in him that would not easily be extinguished. He was no stranger to conflict after all. Every farmer faced storms, droughts, and critics. But invaders, they were the ultimate challenge. He slipped quietly through the darkened home, his heart steadying into a rhythm of purpose. Each step felt like a return to his roots. He made his way to the back door, assessing his surroundings in the moonlight. The barn stood tall, untouched, and sturdy, while the intruders moved closer, intent on their foolish mission. As Jake turned the knob, the heavy door creaked, protesting against its frame. He paused, taking a breath to center himself. A flicker of doubt briefly crossed his mind. What if they were armed? What if he was outnumbered? But then he remembered the generations before him, those who toiled and fought for every inch of earth. He would not falter. With calculated precision, he stepped outside, the night air washing over him like a wave. The laughter had dissipated, replaced by an ominous tension that clung to the air. Jake crouched low, moving closer to the barn, using the shadows as his allies. Then suddenly, chaos erupted. One of the intruders tripped over a loose board, the loud crack snapping them back to reality. Jake seized the opportunity and stepped out into the open, gun raised, aimed not just for intimidation but for preservation. He called out, voice booming like thunder against the quiet night. They froze, caught off guard, eyes darting between each other and Jake. The flickering light from the nearby barn illuminated their faces, young, desperate, with a hint of panic seeping into their bravado. Jake shouted, gesturing with his rifle. Dirt and regret, panic turned to anger in their eyes. One of them sneered, stepping forward, trying to reclaim control. But the fear was palpable, it undercut their bravado. You can't stop us. Jake squared his shoulders, heart drumming a fierce beat. You're right about one thing. You can take what you want. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and electric. Instinctively, the leader of the group moved toward the barn, only to freeze when they heard a rustling noise. A second line of defense Jake had set up. He had scattered tools, traps, and even empty barrels around to confuse and deter any would-be thieves. Panic rose among the invaders as they contemplated the unknown lurking in the shadows. Jake shouted again, raising his rifle, the grip steady in his hands. One of the intruders, shoved by fear, backed up toward the others, his bravado cracking. Jake's heart soared as he felt the balance shift. But the leader wouldn't go down so quietly. With a burst of challenge, he yelled, "We're not leaving empty-handed." He surged forward, adrenaline making him reckless. In that split second, something inside Jake shifted. This was more than just defending the barn. It was about standing tall against the tempest of malice. He didn't aim to kill, he aimed to protect. He shouted, and as the stranger lunged toward him, he squeezed the trigger not to shoot, but releasing a single shot into the air, a warning shot meant to echo across the fields. The noise thundered like a cannon, and a silence fell, thick and oppressive. The intruders scattered like leaves caught in a whirlwind. Chaos erupted, their plans crumbling as they stumbled over themselves in confusion. Fear seized control, driving them away, and for a moment, Jake stood there, sensing the shifting winds of victory. But just as quickly as that moment arrived, so did the reminder of the danger still looming. Adrenaline surged through his veins, and Jake knew they wouldn't go quietly. They would regroup, they would return. Would he be ready? In the days that followed, Jake fortified his defenses, fixing fences, installing locks, and keeping a close watch on the horizon. Sleep became elusive, and shadows danced across his fields as dusk turned to dark. But with each passing moment, he felt an unwavering determination seep deeper into his bones. Long days turned into long nights. He set his sights on preparing, not just for the farm, but for whatever trial they might dare to bring. He crafted improvised defenses, scattering tools and equipment in places they might trip up, setting up lights that flickered in the darkness to confuse intruders. But the nights remained haunted by the specter of those shadows, filling him with grit and resolve. He trained himself to be vigilant, standing outside under the stars, breathing in the cool night air, waiting. And then came the inevitable night. The moon rose high as the wind gusted cold across the fields, a warning sigh that made Jake's skin prickle. The struggle lurked on the horizon, shrouded in the darkness as if waiting for the perfect moment. Jake kept his rifle within arm's reach, an extension of his will. A familiar sound pierced the stillness, washing over him like piercing ice. It was that laugh, that familiar bravado. But this time it was laced with something darker, a determination on their part to reclaim their failure. As shadows embraced the earth, the intruders returned with a newfound ferocity. This time they were armed with pipes and makeshift weapons, emboldened by anger and arrogance. "Come out, farmer." The ringleader's voice cut through the chilling darkness. Jake stepped into the light, unwavering. "You think just because you came back I'll back down?" Thunder rolled in the distance, mirroring the storm brewing between them. Tension crackled in the air, and Jake steadied himself, heart racing. He could see their faces illuminated by the flickering lights. Fear and greed danced within their eyes. One shouted, raising his weapon as if it would provide comfort. "Numbers don't make you brave," Jake replied, voice low, steady, filled with unabashed truth. "Courage is forged in the heart." A flash of anger crossed the ringleader's face, and he reared back, preparing to charge. But Jake had prepared for this moment. He felt the energy pulse through him. "I'll give you one more chance," he warned. And then chaos unfurled. The invaders surged forward, their bravado feeding into reckless abandon. Jake lifted his rifle, aiming not to kill but to protect, the chill of resolution steadying him. And as the world stood still for that split second, he squeezed the trigger, this time aiming low. A shot fired into the ground. The sound ricocheted through the night, sending the would-be invaders scrambling back into the shadows like frightened rabbits caught in the light. He roared, the echo of his voice breaking through the chaos, filled with the weight of generations past, the farmers, the fighters who defended their homes for centuries. An uncertain silence enveloped the field for a heart-stopping moment. The intruders stood frozen, fear washing over them, raw and palpable. They began to retreat, backing away from the line Jake had drawn in the soil. With the last traces of their bravado fading, they escaped into the night, shadows swallowed by the darkness. In that moment, a wave of triumph surged through Jake. He had stood his ground not just for his farm, but for a legacy, for every farmer who had come before him. His heart raced with the fierce storm of victory, peace washing over him like the cool wind that caressed the fields. With careful deliberation, he lowered the rifle, holding it firmly in his hands, a sentinel guarding what was his. Jake Thompson felt the weight of the world lift slightly, knowing he stood ready. The nights that lay ahead might bring challenges, but he was armed, not just with a rifle, but with a fierce spirit that would guard this land, this labor of love, until his last breath. The night was unseasonably warm for early October, with a blanket of stars twinkling like sharp diamonds against the velvet sky. On the edge of an isolated farm, nestled deep in the heartland, a sense of calm held the air. But beneath the surface, trouble brewed. Shadows moved stealthily at the edge of the property, creeping toward the old barn that stood sentinel over the fields. Marcus Green, the farmer, had always felt a bond with this land. He had inherited it from his father and his father before him. This wasn't just a plot of earth. It was home, filled with memories and hard-won victories. Every morning, the sun rose over his rows of corn and soybeans, painting the landscape in golden light. But the night held a different kind of promise, one that felt more like a threat. Marcus was in his kitchen pouring a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the room. But suddenly, an unsettling noise shattered the stillness, a soft rustling, too erratic to be just the wind. He paused, squinting into the dark, heart pounding hard in his chest. Glancing at the clock, he realized it was past midnight. The world should be sleeping at this hour. He stepped to the front window, peering out into the yard illuminated by the pale moonlight. That's when he saw them three hooded figures slipping from the shadows, their intent as clear as the cloudless night above. They moved cautiously, eyes darting around, trying not to make a sound. They were here to invade the haven he had built and nurtured. Panic surged through him, but it quickly transformed into determination. He reached for the old hunting rifle that hung over the fireplace. It was a family relic, passed down through generations, every scratch and dent a testament to its history. He gripped it tightly, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He wasn't going to let them destroy what his family had built. Adrenaline coursed through his veins as he moved towards the door, careful not to make a sound. He opened it just a crack enough to see them clearly. The figures were nearing the barn now, clearly intent on finding something of value. Rage bubbled within him. They thought they could just stroll onto his property, take what was his, and leave without consequence. Stepping outside, he felt the cool air against his skin, a stark contrast to the heat of his anger. He shouted, his voice slicing through the night. "Get away from my barn!" The intruders froze like deer caught in headlights. Their wide eyes reflected shock and confusion, but it didn't last long. The ringleader, a tall figure draped in black, snorted and stepped forward, a hint of bravado creeping in. "You're all alone out here, old man." Every fiber of Marcus's being wanted to retreat, to let fear take over, but he remembered his father's words, "Stand your ground, son." With that echo in his mind, he raised the rifle and aimed it into the air, firing a shot that cracked like thunder and sent the invaders stumbling back. The sound of the gunshot reverberated through the fields, a primal declaration, and they hesitated, uncertainty washing over them. "I'll do it again." His voice had transformed into a growl, raw and fierce. For a moment, the night was still. The intruders exchanged glances, the bravado faltering as fear crept back in. The silence was deafening. The rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl seemed to echo all around them. But his voice lacked conviction, wobbling under the weight of doubt. He glanced backward, weighing his options. Then, without warning, they turned and sprinted toward the edge of the property, the sound of their hurried footsteps fading into the dark. Marcus stood frozen, rifle still raised, heart racing, lungs pulling in heavy breaths. Had it worked? Were they really leaving? As the echoes of their panic receded, he felt a rush of triumph surging through him. He had defended his home, but the victory was bittersweet. He knew they might return, emboldened by their numbers or desperation. They had seen what lay on his land. Would they come back with a larger crew next time? The rest of the night passed with a sense of foreboding. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. He stayed awake, watching from his porch, listening to the night, his mind racing through the possibilities. Every creak of the house seemed magnified, and he felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. He had to be prepared. With the dawn came clarity. As the sun broke free from the horizon, he began plotting, strategizing every inch of his property. He spent hours moving heavy equipment around the farm, creating impromptu obstacles that would slow any intruders down. He even replaced the old locks on the barn doors and set up a motion sensor light that would flood the area with bright light if anyone dared approach again. Days turned into weeks, with an ever-growing sense of vigilance wrapped tightly around him. Marcus couldn't rest. The invaders clung to his thoughts like a shadow. The farm was his life. His heart and soul poured into every seed he planted, every nail he drove into the barn. As the harvest season approached, the tension started to permeate every part of his being. He worked through the days, scanning the fields for signs of trouble, as if watching for a storm brewing on the horizon. But trouble, it seemed, was not far behind. One evening, while he was stacking bales of hay, the sinking sun cast long shadows that crawled across the fields. As he stood up and wiped the sweat from his brow, there it was again, the unmistakable sound of movement. He felt the shift in the air, the familiar rush of adrenaline coursing through him. Peering down the dirt road, he saw silhouettes breaking through the trees more than before, this time at least 5 figures. Fear gripped him for just a moment, a visceral jolt, but it quickly morphed into cold resolve. He gripped the rifle once again, sensing it like an extension of himself. This was it. This was the moment he had been preparing for. Now, as they approached, their demeanor was noticeably different than the last encounter. They were more confident, eyes gleaming with the excitement of the hunt. A wild animal doesn't back down once it senses prey. The leader called out, his voice resonating with bravado. Marcus felt the primal urge to defend his territory rise within him. "You think I'm just going to let you walk all over me?" He heard the conviction in his own voice, clearer and stronger than he felt. He fired a shot into the air again, the thunderous crack echoing through the fields, reverberating in the silence that hung in the air. The directness of the shot struck their bravado like a knife. They paused, uncertainty creeping back in. The leader yelled again, but he sounded less sure now, the bravado attempting but failing to mask the wavering voice. "If you step foot on my property, you'll regret it," Marcus warned, his heart pounding, adrenaline surging with a fierce intensity. The shadows drew closer, but they could see the determination etched on his face, could feel the power of the moment hovering. With the sound of another gunshot ringing through the night, the invaders scattered again, fear taking hold and propelling them into flight. They darted back toward the tree line, a chaotic mix of panic and disbelief. Once again, Marcus felt that rush of triumph wash over him. He stood at the edge of his land, chest heaving, heart racing. The night air was thick with the taste of victory, but alongside it came a sense of fragility. The fight wasn't over, these threats were persistent. Days passed and dread became a constant companion. Each night, Marcus could feel them watching, plotting. He had transformed from a simple farmer into a guardian of his land. They would come again. Desperation at this level was a potent force. One night in the thick blanket of darkness, an unforeseen storm appeared from nowhere, crashing through the calm. Rain lashed against the windows, the wind howled like a tempest unleashed. It was a wild night, and somewhere deep inside he felt the anticipation of conflict stir. And then it happened. The sudden slam of metal against metal rattled through the barn, the sound an ominous echo. They were back again, emboldened by chaos and the cover of darkness. Heart pounding, fear and adrenaline twisted together like vines around his thoughts. He bolted towards the barn, every instinct screaming at him to act quickly. The pounding rain soaked him through, but didn't matter. He could feel the weight of his heritage. His family held this land strong for generations. He muttered under his breath, steeling himself for what was to come. As he approached, he saw them, silhouettes against the flickering barn light trying to pry open the door. Rushing forward with a roar, he emerged from the darkness, gun raised high, aiming for the air again. "Back off." They turned, their bravado stripped away as the realization sank in. But this time, one of them lunged forward with a reckless determination born of desperation. He grabbed a heavy pipe, swinging it wildly, and that is when the chaos erupted. Marcus fired again, hitting the ground just inches from the advancing shadow, causing him to stagger back. Everything moved in a blur, the sound of rain pounding against the earth, the desperate cries of the intruders, the surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins. In the clash of wills, the fierce storm mirrored his emotions. They wanted to take his livelihood, but he was prepared to defend it with everything he had. It was fight or flight, and he had chosen to fight. The ringleader shouted something, trying to rally his crew into some kind of order, but the fear spread like wildfire. They had underestimated him, the quiet farmer with a legacy born of sweat and sacrifice. As Marcus lunged forward, the rain hammering down upon them, he felt an unexpected surge of strength. Each motion was deliberate, fueled by the desire to protect the land he loved. With a final effort, he charged, aiming to intimidate and disperse them. At the edge of the chaos, the ringleader faltered, stumbling back into the looming darkness. He shouted, voice shrill with panic, scrambling to escape as the remaining intruders melted away into the storm. Breathless and soaked, Marcus stood alone in the silence that followed, rain mixing with sweat and adrenaline. The tempest raged on around him, but for now he had won. He looked around at the mess of fallen crates, the overturned equipment, and felt the weight of what he'd defended. Withdrawing from the heart of the storm, he knew the battle might be won, but the war was ever looming. Every night after, he kept watch, fortified with security lights, alerts, and a steely resolve that wouldn't waver. He was always ready, heart set on defending not just a piece of land, but a legacy that had stood bold against every storm and every fight. It wouldn't matter how many shadows tried to fall on his land, Marcus would be there, prepared and unwavering. The farming life was harsh and relentless, but so was the spirit of those who called it home. In the fierce light of dawn, he found strength, knowing that beneath the weight of the storms yet to come, his roots would hold firm. And as long as they did, he knew he would always stand ready to defend what was his. The night was eerily quiet, the kind of stillness that wraps around you like a blanket, making you feel both safe and vulnerable. In the heart of the countryside, farmer Dave Harding sat on his porch, sipping a cup of coffee, the steam curling into the cool evening air. There was something almost cinematic about the moment the golden glow of the porch light illuminating the worn wooden steps, the faint sounds of crickets chirping under a star-studded sky. But lurking beneath that tranquility was an unsettling sense of tension, a feeling that not everything was as it should be. Just then, a sudden rustling from the direction of the barn snapped Dave's attention. It was late, too late for any of his animals to be stirring. Heart racing, he set his coffee down and rose to his feet. Dave wasn't just any farmer. He was a man who had put years of sweat and hard work into building his land into something special. The crops were healthy, the livestock well cared for. This was his life's work. And he'd be damned if anyone thought they could waltz in and take it from him. He stepped off the porch, the wooden planks creaking beneath his weight as the chill in the air began to seep into his bones. Staring into the darkness, he could see shadows flitting near the barn. In that moment, he didn't need a flashlight to see that something was wrong. He moved toward the barn quietly, every instinct telling him he wasn't alone. The shadows became figures, 3, maybe 4 of them. They wore hooded sweatshirts, faces obscured. Their nervous laughter felt intrusive, like an unwelcome wind breaking the stillness. They were up to no good, of that Dave was certain. He had spent his life building this farm, pouring his heart into the soil, and these intruders thought they could just take it away. His voice cut through the night, firm and steady. The laughter stopped abruptly. The intruders froze, momentarily caught off guard by the unexpected challenge. Their eyes reflected the light, and as they began to shuffle, Dave felt a surge of adrenaline course through him. It was a familiar feeling, one he hadn't experienced in years, dating back to his younger days when he had to stand up to bullies at school. This was his territory, and he would defend it. He shouted again, swinging the flashlight menacingly. The intruders exchanged glances, a flicker of uncertainty creeping in. It was clear they hadn't counted on being confronted. One of them stepped forward, a scruffy-looking young man whose bravado was thinly veiled by his fear. "We're just here for some supplies, man," he said, trying to sound casual, but his voice wavered. Dave locked eyes with him, unyielding. "I don't think you understand what get off my land means." Sweat began to bead on his forehead, not from fear but from the intensity of the moment. He had a rifle, worn from years of use, hanging by the door. All he had to do was say the word and he could fetch it. But he didn't want to escalate the situation. He was not a violent man by nature. He just wanted to protect what was his. But as the intruders began to advance, their confidence returning, he knew he had to act. I'm not kidding. He aimed the flashlight at their feet, illuminating the ground between them, drawing a line in the sand. They hesitated, uncertainty creating a rift in their bravado. Then, without warning, they darted toward the barn. Dave's heart sank. They weren't just here to scare him, they were planning to steal from him. He thundered, and in that moment, fury took over. He sprinted toward the barn, instinct driving him. It wasn't just about theft anymore. It was about the pride and hard work he had poured into this land. As he pushed through the barn doors, the barn emerged in a glorious swirl of shadows and moonlight. The figures were rummaging through the supplies, and in a flash, Dave grabbed an old wooden pitchfork leaning against the wall, feeling its sturdy handle in his grip. He roared, brandishing the pitchfork like a sword, fear morphing into fierce determination. The intruders froze again, eyes wide, caught between the thrill of theft and the fear of confrontation. They had crossed a line, and now it was time to face the consequences. The ringleader turned to dart out the door, but Dave advanced, swinging the pitchfork in a warning arc. He said, voice rising with intensity, "You think this is a game?" The shadows shifted, retreating as they stumbled over crates. There was panic now, a frantic desperation that transformed their earlier bravado into a chaotic scramble. In one swift motion, Dave lunged forward again, trying to corner them within the barn. This is your last chance. Time hung in the balance, the tension palpable. Not only were they trying to rob him, they were underestimating him. This wasn't just about things, it was about respect. It was about everything he had built. One intruder called out, his voice shaking. Dave's grip on the pitchfork tightened. "You don't belong here. If you wanted food, you should have asked." Somewhere deep inside, he recalled a lesson his father had taught him long ago. Always stand up for what's yours, but remember the power of a voice. His heart was racing, but at that moment he understood this wasn't merely about them breaking in. It was about his life, the sacrifices he had made, the integrity of his land. With a hesitant glimmer of fear growing in their eyes, the intruders slowly backed away, inching toward the door while trying to find a way out. "Okay, man," another one said, barely above a whisper. Dave commanded, voice firm as a rock. They stumbled backward, finally crossing the threshold back into the open air. They had underestimated the farmer in front of them, and for the first time they were seeing him not as a target, but as a protector of his domain. As they fled into the night, Dave stood in the doorway, pitchfork raised high, preparing for any last-minute attempts. He could feel the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. The air was electric, filled with the tension of the moment they had just shared. Once they disappeared beyond the tree line, he dropped the pitchfork, heart pounding, the weight of what had just transpired sending him reeling. He understood now that the danger wasn't just in the intrusion. It was the threat of disconnection, of being stripped from what gave his life meaning. With a sudden wave of relief washing over him, Dave looked at his barn, his sanctuary. The memories flooded back, moments of laughter shared while mending the roof or nights spent under the stars with family gathered around a small fire. This place was woven into the very fabric of who he was. But as the adrenaline began to dull, reality settled in. They would be back. Desperation had a way of pushing people beyond their limits, and this encounter had only raised the stakes. That night, he didn't sleep. He made sure to reinforce the locks and check every nook and cranny of the farm. He walked the perimeter, inspecting the fences and listening for any sign of disturbance. Shadows flitted across the ground, reminding him of the intruders' faces and the intensity of that confrontation. Over the next few days, Dave felt the tension creeping in like an unwelcome visitor. Every creak of the floorboards and rustle of the leaves was a reminder that he wasn't safe just yet. And while he tried to maintain a sense of normalcy during the day, he couldn't shake the feeling that they would return. Then, just as he had suspected, came the dusk of another fateful night. The air was thick and charged. The clouds had rolled in, blocking the stars, and soon the sound of rain started to patter down softly, a light drizzle that intensified quickly. He was working late in the barn, checking supplies and ensuring everything was locked down tight when he heard it again. the unmistakable sound of footsteps. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as adrenaline surged once more. This time, Dave was ready. He moved silently, optimizing every bit of his surroundings. He had already set up some motion sensors, and just as he had prayed, they began to flash, lighting the space with an electric buzz. Once again, shadows approached, eager for the weakness they thought they could exploit. And this time, they had brought more four figures, and they were armed with bats and makeshift weapons. As they drew closer, Dave's mind raced back to defensive tactics he had read about and learned over the years. He had prepared for this moment. He grabbed a heavy metal lantern from a shelf, its weight grounding him in the chaos about to unfold. He shouted, voice dripping with authority, and the words rumbled through the barn like thunder. They stopped, startled, uncertainty flickering across their faces. His words cut through the rain. You see that land behind me? Every inch of it, every corner, is something I've built. The four intruders looked at one another, the bravado crumbling beneath the intensity of his conviction. They were all too aware now that this was more than just a game. One of them blurted out, just let us go. But Dave held his ground, the lantern gripped tightly in his hands, its intimidating presence reflecting his fierce determination. You brought the trouble to my door. You want to leave, then turn around and walk away. For a brief heartbeat, the group hesitated. Rain poured down, glistening on their faces, doubt rippling among them like a disharmonious choir. Dave thundered again, raising the lantern higher, and in that moment of uncertainty, he felt an echo of strength surge through him. As they turned and bolted into the storm, he understood more profoundly than ever. It wasn't just about keeping them out. It was about cherishing what mattered most: his home, the legacy, and the commitment to never let anyone take what belonged to him. When dawn broke, illuminating the battlefield of last night's chaos, Dave stood amidst the remnants, surveying the land. A sense of victory washed over him, mixed with a newfound clarity. He had faced them and he had won, but he knew this wouldn't be the end. Sometimes the real fight doesn't happen in the heat of the moment. It's the quiet moments after, the lingering feeling of vulnerability. But Dave was ready to face whatever came next. The land beneath his feet wasn't just dirt. It was his life's hard work, and he would protect it fiercely. The reality of farming life never faded. It was filled with struggles and joys, loss and triumph. And through it all, he discovered his strength not just as a farmer but as a protector. And no matter the challenge, he would always stand ready to defend what was rightfully his against any invader who dared to cross his path. The twilight sky was painted in shades of deep purple and fading orange as Nathan Hale, a seasoned farmer, finished his evening chores. The barn doors creaked gently in the evening breeze, and he leaned against the wooden frame, taking a moment to soak in the serenity of his land. This was home, a sprawling patch of earth he had poured his soul into for over 20 years. The barn stood proudly, filled with the fruits of his labor machines, hay bales, and memories. But even in this quiet haven, trouble was stirring. Just beyond the tree line that bordered his property, shadows flickered, and unease slithered through the air like fog. He had heard whispers in town, rumors of people desperate enough to steal from those who had worked hard to earn their keep. As he wiped the sweat from his brow, Nathan felt the prickling sensation of being watched. Thrusting aside his instinct to ignore it, he moved cautiously around the barn, feeling the damp earth beneath his boots. In the woods, he spotted movement, dark figures shrouded in uncertainty. They were lurking, assessing, sizing up what they thought would be an easy target. Anger welled up inside him. This land was built on grit and struggle, and he wouldn't stand silently by while others tried to take it from him. As the last rays of sunlight flickered, Nathan's world transformed from calm to tense anticipation. The three figures moved closer, emboldened by the cover of dusk. They seemed younger, fueled by energy and desperation, congregating in whispers like a pack preparing to pounce. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest, a steady beat reminding him of the stakes. He made his way back to the house, glancing around for anything that could help him defend his territory. As he stepped through the doorway, he spotted his old hunting rifle, aged but well cared for, hanging over the fireplace. He grabbed it, feeling the cold metal against his palms, a reassuring reminder of the trust and responsibility it represented. With a deep breath, he peered through the window, adrenaline thrumming beneath his skin. Their laughter reached his ears, a cruel sound that turned his gut. Anger and resolve twisted together like a fierce storm. He wasn't just going to protect his possessions, he was going to fight for his way of life. He shouted, stepping out onto the porch, the screen door slamming behind him. The intruders jolted, turning abruptly, eyes wide with surprise. "You think you can just stroll onto my land?" One of them, a wiry young man with a tattoo snaking up his forearm, smirked, trying to regain control of the situation. "Come on, old man, we're just looking for some food." Nathan squared his shoulders. "You want food, ask for it." For a moment, silence engulfed the night. The tension between them was thick, hanging in the air like a storm cloud, each side weighing its options. Nathan could see the fear creeping into their eyes, anxiety battling against their bravado. He recognized that darkness. He had felt it himself in his youth. "You've got no business being here." He shouted again, voice echoing. And maybe it was the strength in his voice, or perhaps they simply realized they had bitten off more than they could chew. The laughter faded, replaced by hesitation that morphed into panic. They began to back away, but the leader of the group, emboldened by a surge of rash courage, lunged forward. Nathan's instincts kicked in and he lifted the rifle, aiming it toward the ground next to the encroaching figure. He didn't want to shoot, he just wanted to make a point. The sound of the shot reverberated through the night like a declaration of war. He shouted again and the intruders scrambled, a flurry of panic as they fled back toward the woods. A surge of triumph washed over Nathan. He had stood up for his land and they had retreated, snatching at their pride. But that sense of triumph was short-lived. In the days that followed, unease continued to gnaw at him. Bursts of laughter echoed through the fields at night, and he could sense them lurking, plotting their return. Nathan knew they wouldn't give up that easily. Desperation can drive people to do terrible things. One sleepless night, he sat on the porch, watching the stars come alive against the void. How could he protect what he had fought so hard to build? As fear crept into his heart, the idea of losing everything drove him to action. In the following days, Nathan devised a plan. He secured the barn, replaced locks, and installed a motion sensor light along the perimeters. The days turned into restless nights, his mind racing with possibilities and scenarios, his dreams filled with images of those figures invading his home once more. He even set up a small alarm system using old pots and pans anything to create noise if someone approached. Before long, the harvest season arrived, a time meant for celebration and hard-earned reward. But beneath the veil of abundance was a layer of anxiety. Nathan moved with purpose but felt like he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. He worked tirelessly, trusting his instincts to guide him. Then came that fateful evening when the wind turned sharp, signaling the impending rain. Nathan was hauling in the last of the hay bales when he sensed the change in the atmosphere. As the sun dipped below the horizon, darkness blanketed the farmland. And then it began, first a light patter, and then a torrential downpour, rattling against the barn roof. But it wasn't the rain that sent a shiver down Nathan's spine, it was the sound of voices outside, unmistakable and laced with urgency. He stepped out, soaked to the bone, scanning the area around the barn. The sense of familiarity was chilling. They were back. This time he counted 5 figures, darting around like startled animals. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach, the adrenaline pulsing as he crouched low near the barn's edge. Peering through the splintered wood, he could see them trying to pry open the barn doors, desperate and determined. He yelled, voice booming against the backdrop of the storm. "You think this is a game?" They hesitated, glancing nervously at one another. For just a moment, the wind seemed to echo his words, a guttural roar that filled the silence. But then, the ringleader, the same tattooed young man, stepped forward, brandishing a crowbar. "We're not afraid of you anymore, farmer." Nathan felt his heart race, emotion simmered just beneath the surface. He could feel the weight of his ancestors on his shoulders, the legacy to defend, and the droughts of years gone by that shaped him. He pulled out his rifle, raised it high, aimed into the night, and fired a warning shot into the air. Talons of fear gripped the intruders now. He shouted, feeling righteous anger fuel his resolve. This is your last chance." But desperation had a way of twisting rational thought, and the ringleader charged forward, fueled by a reckless blaze of adrenaline. He shouted, lunging toward Nathan. In that heart-stopping moment, Nathan took aim, but before he could react, the others fell back under the weight of uncertainty. It was chaos, water drenching the ground as they stumbled. Nathan felt the surge of adrenaline sharpen his focus. This was it, the moment where bravery faced recklessness. He cried, swinging the rifle like a batter at a game. "This is my home." The confrontation escalated as voices rose and feet pounded, the sound of panic producing a weird kind of energy. In that moment, Nathan understood that this was more than property. This was his legacy, his very soul resting in the soil beneath his feet. The ringleader stuttered, momentarily losing his nerve, and it was enough to tip the balance. With a sudden rush, they turned and fled into the raging storm, feet splashing against the muddy ground, shadows disappearing into the night. Nathan stood there in the heavy rain, breathless and heart-pounding, victory surging through him. He had realized that defending the land was only one part of the battle. The other part was standing firm against fear, ensuring that what mattered to him was safeguarded. That night, his anxieties clung to him like mist, knowing all too well that their desperation could lead to something even more dangerous. So he took stock of his land, determined to do more than react. He would prepare. He fortified the barn again, set traps, and looked to the horizon with a keen eye. In the following days, the weight of what transpired hung heavily over him. The weeks turned into a blur of restless nights and relentless preparations. Nathan understood the shadow looming over his farm was far from gone. He felt trapped in a cycle of fear, but he also realized that each hurdle he faced had prepared him for the ultimate test. One dark evening, with the moon barely visible through thick clouds, Nathan caught sight of movement again. This time it was different. It felt heavier, like an impending storm ready to break. His heart raced as the memories of the intruders flooded his mind, triggering an instinctual response. This time, it wasn't just about defending his land, it was personal. As they crept forward, Nathan felt a fire ignite within him. He wasn't going to wait. He pulled on his boots and stepped out into the scent of rain-drenched earth. The night was full of promise and lurking danger. He shouted, his voice cutting through the darkness. But this time it was a procession of 12 figures, emboldened by their numbers. Their laughter was menacing, surrounded by whispers of assurance as they moved through the night. Trapped in the throes of confrontation, Nathan felt anger pool in his chest. "You think I'm afraid?" The words echoed, filled with defiance and strength. As they advanced, Nathan felt the gravity of the moment pushing him forward. With the rifle gripped tightly in hand, he fired a warning shot once more. The noise reverberated, creating a cacophony that shattered their confidence. As the echoes ricocheted through the night, Nathan could feel them falter. He commanded, tension coursing through him. The hesitation was palpable, shock coursed through the ranks of intruders. In that second, Nathan threw himself into the role of protector, standing his ground against an overwhelming tide of distress. With a swift motion, he scanned the faces before him, resolve hardened in their eyes. Realization struck they were not invulnerable. They may have come together, but they had not come prepared to confront a man willing to fight for his identity. One by one, they began to slink back, retreating into the darkness from which they had come. Nathan felt a sting of victory, though it was bittersweet. The weight of adrenaline still coursed through him, but he had made his stand. More than a farmer, he was a guardian of his legacy. In the days that followed, Nathan realized that while shadows lingered, he had forged something stronger, his will to protect what mattered. Laura, his wife, joined him on the porch one evening, and they watched the sun dip below the horizon together, the air peaceful around them. "They'll come back," he said, voice steady yet laden with resolve. The freedom in that statement felt like dawn breaking through a stormy night. They would share this land together, safeguarded by the steadfastness of love and hard work. As he held her hand, Nathan knew he was not just fighting against invaders. He was preserving the very heartbeat of their existence, their legacy, and the life they cherished. In every challenge that lay ahead, he stood unwavering, knowing that the spirit of his farm ran deep through his veins. It wasn't just about crops or land anymore. It was about honor, pride, and the strength to always stand ready against the forces that threatened to take it all away. And in that strength dwelled the heart of a farmer, resolute in the belief that he was ready to conquer whatever storms the future would bring. It was a moonless night, perfect for shadows to creep around the edges of the world. On a small rural farm, the only sounds were the gentle rustle of corn stalks and the distant call of an owl. Farmer Jake Mercer stood outside his weathered barn, the scent of damp earth and hay filling the air. He wiped his brow, taking a moment to appreciate the tranquil scene before him. But something felt off, an electric tension hanging in the air like a storm was about to break. Suddenly, a twig snapped in the dense brush just beyond the fence. Jake's heart raced, instincts kicking in. He had spent countless nights under this sky, and he knew every whisper of the wind, every rustle of the grass. This was no ordinary night. Something was wrong. He moved closer to the edge of the property, straining to see into the darkness. Then he spotted them figures moving stealthily through the rows of corn, their outlines barely discernible in the dim light. 3 of them, heart-pounding silhouettes creeping like thieves in the night. They looked young, maybe high schoolers. Desperation clung to them like a heavy blanket. Jake felt a surge of anger at their audacity. This was his land hard-earned and sacred. Every inch had been cultivated with care and sweat, each grain of dirt a testament to years of toil. He had faced storms, droughts, and hardships, but never had he imagined someone would try to invade his home. The fire in his belly ignited. He wouldn't let them take what was his. He stepped back into the barn, the door creaking like it too had grown anxious. He grabbed a pitchfork leaning against the wall, its prongs glinting in the faint light. It was a tool of the trade, but tonight it felt like a sword, a weapon of defense. As he walked back outside, the shadows flickered closer to the barn's edge. "Hey, you're trespassing," he hollered, voice steady and commanding. The figures froze, caught like deer in headlights. Jake could feel his heart pounding in sync with the impending confrontation. One of them, a tall kid with a shock of messy hair, took a tentative step forward. "We're just looking for something to eat, man." His voice wavered, betraying the bravado he tried to project. Jake pulled himself up to his full height, the pitchfork gripped tightly in his hands. He shot back, the fire in his belly giving strength to his words. Silence hung between them, the tension so thick it felt suffocating. The young men exchanged glances, uncertainty blooming in their eyes. They didn't expect someone like Jake to stand up to them. They thought he would cower or back down. "Come on, let's just grab something and go," one of the others whispered, clearly nervous about confronting the imposing figure before them. Jake took a step forward, eyes narrowing. "Is that how you want to do this?" In an instant, the bravado dissolved. The tall kid's shoulders slumped, the fierce facade cracked, revealing a boy caught in a bite of panic. "We thought there'd be no one here." But Jake wasn't done. "Then turn around and leave now." His voice boomed, echoing into the night. They hesitated, the grip of fear tightening around them. One by one, they turned and sprinted back into the darkness, a rush of adrenaline pushing them forward. Jake stood still, pitchfork raised high, waiting to ensure they wouldn't come back. The quiet returned, the only sound the soft rustling of the corn in the wind. Jake took a moment to steady his breathing. The rush of adrenaline surged through him, a cocktail of fear, relief, and anger. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Weeks passed, but the memory of that night haunted him like an uninvited guest lingering in the dark corners of his mind. He fortified his property, added locks to the barn, patched up gaps in the fences, and laid out traps to deter any would-be invaders. He spent sleepless nights under the stars, scanning the darkness for any sign of trouble. Each day, whispers in town confirmed his fears. There were rumors of teens in the area looking for easy targets, and Jake refused to play the victim. He was determined to protect what he had built with grit and resilience. His farm was his heart, his legacy, and he would not allow anyone to tear it down. But late one evening, as thunder rumbled in the distance, the air thick with anticipation, Jake felt that familiar knot tighten in his gut. The clouds rolled in and the wind picked up, announcing a storm was on the way. He just sealed the last bale of hay when he heard it, another rustle. Heart racing, he spun around, scanning the perimeter. There, just beyond the trees, he spotted movement. The shadows he had dreaded were back, creeping forward like the harbingers of disaster. This time they were bolder, at least 5 figures, emboldened by their numbers. "Not again," he muttered, clenching the pitchfork tightly. He positioned himself in front of the barn, ready to defend whatever it was they were trying to take. The storm started to pour, heavy raindrops masking their approach, but he was ready for them. The moment the first figure stepped into clearer view, Jake called out, "You think you can take from me?" The whirlwind of storm and darkness swallowed his words, but they took heed. The leader, a boy with wild hair and a defiant look, stepped forward. "We're just here to grab supplies." Jake's voice was steady, slicing through the downpour. "You think I'm going to let you steal from me just because you say so?" The group hesitated, uncertainty creeping into their ranks. The defiance faltered as the boy's bravado cracked. It was clear to Jake that they were scared. Desperate people often were. Suddenly, the ringleader turned to his friends. The storm raged around them, a tempest mirroring the chaos that had erupted. Jake's heart thudded in his chest, primal instincts flooding his thoughts. He bellowed, dusting away the discomfort of fear. As he cradled the pitchfork, he could see them weighing their options. Then, without warning, the leader lunged forward, a crazed look in his eyes. Time slowed. The pitchfork jabbed toward the boy, but it wasn't meant to harm, just a warning. The sound of the metal scraping against the damp ground reverberated, a resonating threat laced with urgency. The group recoiled, panic flushing their faces as they stumbled into one another, unsure of what to do. They hadn't expected confrontation, hadn't counted on someone standing their ground. The dynamics shifted, fear rippled through them. "Get out!" Jake shouted, voice carrying over the gathering storm, fierce and unwavering. In an instant, they turned, scrambling back into the shadows from which they had emerged, retreating like water washing away footprints in the sand. Relief washed over him, but as he looked around at the chaos left behind, he realized his fight was far from over. That night, the storm waned to a drizzle, but Jake felt the storm brewing inside him, a mix of anger and determination. The skirmishes were just a prelude to an ongoing battle he could feel lurking beneath the surface. This was about more than just crops. It was about dignity and respect. He didn't sleep. Instead, he fortified his home, moving heavy equipment to block possible entrances and staying vigilant, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He couldn't afford to be caught off guard again. With every noise that echoed through the night, he listened closely. Every creak of the barn felt magnified. Days turned into restless weeks. The tension hung in the air like the threat of summer heat before a storm. Jake packed away the last of the summer harvest, ever watchful, feelings of dread clawing at him. He needed to stay ready. He needed to ensure he didn't become a victim. And then that fateful evening arrived. The air was heavy and charged, warnings echoing through the town. The clouds rolled in, thick and dark, pregnant with rain. Jake felt alive in the chaos, anticipation coursing through him as he settled in for another long night. As he sat on the porch, coffee steaming in hand, he spotted movement once again, shadows flitting through the cornfields, unmistakable forms gathering again. This time, they were different. There were more, at least 6 figures moving stealthily, an audacious wave of defiance pushing against the hem of fear. His heart raced, not just with fear, but with a fierce kind of courage. Jake didn't know how many times he could stand against them, but he wasn't about to let the world take his home, not without a fight. He shouted, voice steady as the storm raged on, the words ringing out like a battle cry. They froze again, silhouettes caught mid-motion, the sound of thunder rumbling in the background, a fitting stage for the confrontation about to unfold. One shouted back, bravado thinly veiled by fear. This time, something in Jake snapped. "You want to take from me, you want something. Be a man and ask for it." As the figures shifted uncertainly, Jake could feel the tide turning. He held his ground, his heart a steady drumbeat. "You think you can take everything from people like me? I will not stand down." Every instinct in his body was alive. As the ringleader stepped forward, fists clenched and fury shining in their eyes, Jake threw up the pitchfork, the metal glinting menacingly in the darkness. Before he could react, one of the boys lunged, but Jake was prepared. He sidestepped, leveraging the weight of his body, and hurled the pitchfork forward, aimed not to harm but to intimidate. The The tool hit the ground with a loud thud, startling the would-be thieves and breaking their advancing line. He bellowed, voice echoing through the chaos. With that primal roar, the shadows crumbled. One by one, they turned and fled, disappearing into the night, the sound of their hurried steps swallowed by the storm. Jake stood there, breathless, heart pounding in his chest, the adrenaline surge of victory coursing through his veins. But beneath that rush lay understood anxiety, the uncertainty that would never fully fade. In the days that followed, he knew they would return. Desperation had a way of numbing fear, pushing people to the edge. But whatever storm brewed outside, he would be ready once again. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the darkness closed in, Jake felt steady, resolute. This wasn't just about a farmer defending his land. It was about standing firm in the face of chaos and claiming what was rightfully his. No matter how many shadows tried to invade his sanctuary, he would remain steadfast. And even if storms raged outside, he would cultivate peace within, promising to protect his home, his legacy, and all he held dear. In the heart of that resilient farmer, conviction burned bright, prepared to face whatever the future held. In storm or sun, he would always be ready. The night was treacherous, wrapped in a cloak of darkness that obscured everything but the faintest glimmers of starlight. On the outskirts of a small town, nestled among vast fields of wheat and corn, stood Old Man Harrison's farm, a place where hard work thrived. It was a testament to generations spent tilling the soil. But tonight, something sinister lingered in the cool, still air, whispering warnings through the rustling leaves. Harrison, a grizzled farmer in his late 60s, peered through the front window of his weathered farmhouse, the glow of the lantern casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls. The evening had been unusually quiet, an unsettling stillness that sent a ripple of unease through him. He shifted, feeling a tightening knot in his stomach as he spotted movement near the edge of his property. At first, it was a mere shadow, flitting between the rows of corn, a trick of the light perhaps. But then he saw it again, and this time it took form. More shadows emerged, figures slinking closer, cloaked in darkness like thieves poised to strike. Harrison's heart pounded fiercely in his chest as he instinctively moved toward the door, each creak of the floorboards thundering in the silence. He had weathered many storms in his life, those born of nature's fury and those born of human greed. But he wasn't about to let anyone take what was his. The strangely familial unease morphed into determination, and he would defend this land with everything he had. In the corner of the living room rested a shotgun, the wood polished from years of care. He grasped it firmly, feeling its weight settle comfortably in his hands like an old friend. With quiet resolve, he stepped outside into the cool night, the moon hanging high, lighting the path ahead. As he approached the edge of his property, he saw them clearly now, 3 young men, their clothes tattered, their eyes darting with the flicker of mischief and desperation. They paused, clearly unsure now that they realized they weren't alone. Harrison squared his shoulders and shouted, "You're trespassing." The intruders froze momentarily, their bravado flickering like the wind-blown candlelight behind him. The tallest one, a wiry kid with unkempt hair, tried to muster a grin, but it was shaky, a mask over a fissure of fear. "We were just looking for some food, old man," he said, voice trembling. "No harm." Harrison's voice deepened, echoing the fury that surged within him. The panic in their eyes deepened, swapping bravado for uncertainty. They hadn't expected to be confronted, especially not by a man who had spent a lifetime cultivating strength in the very soil they sought to exploit. "You have a choice," Harrison continued, raising the shotgun slowly, a non-threatening ultimatum. No longer just a farmer, he had become the last line of defense for both his livelihood and his dignity. In a moment of uncertainty, the leader exchanged a glance with his companions. They seemed to weigh their options, but it was clear their confidence was crumbling under the powerful gaze of Old Man Harrison. Just as the leader began to step back, an unexpected challenge surged forth. The second boy lunged forward, desperation driving him like a raging current. "Please, we just want a few supplies." Harrison's instincts flared and he thrust the shotgun forward, the barrel aimed low but threatening enough to leave no doubt. He shouted, voice rising above the distant rumble of thunder. The boys hesitated, Fear hung in the air, dragging them back into the shadows from which they'd emerged. That moment of hesitation cost them dearly. In their retreat, they turned away, rushing into the night, scrambling like startled animals fleeing a predator. Harrison held his ground, letting out a breath he didn't know he was holding, but the triumph was fleeting. The adrenaline still coursed through him, but as the night wore on, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. They would be back. People driven by desperation didn't give up easily. He had lived long enough to know that. As he locked the doors and settled in for the night, Harrison couldn't shake the sense of vulnerability now pulsing through his chest. He had secured every entrance and turned off the lights, but his mind was elsewhere, at the edge of the fields where shadows danced with the wind. Days passed, and the farm felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Rumors swirled, tales of theft echoing through the town. He moved through his daily chores with a heightened awareness, scanning the horizon for any signs of trouble. Each creak of the old house held new meaning, a reminder that danger lurked just outside. Then came an ominous evening, the air thick with humidity, and the sky bruised with dark clouds. Harrison knew that storms could bring hardship to farmers, but tonight he felt the brewing violence of something else. This was more than a simple tempest. It felt like the calm before a fight. As he moved about the farm, preparing, his instincts tingled. The distant rumble of thunder matched the pounding in his heart. And then he saw them again, lurking just beyond the tree line, their figures emerging like shadows weaving through darkness. This time there were more, at least 4 of them, emboldened by numbers. Hands trembling slightly, Harrison slipped back toward the barn, grabbing the lantern to illuminate the area outside. As the light cut through the darkness, he shouted, "I see you. You think you can scare me?" The group hesitated, but then quickly charged forward, amazement and frenzy crashing against Harrison's daunting presence. The tall kid from before was in the lead, his eyes wild. The surge of adrenaline surged again, and Harrison felt the simmering anger boil to the surface. "Get back!" He raised the shotgun, aiming at the ground, but it was enough to make them pause. Harrison shouted, dreading he would have to take drastic action. The weight of the shotgun felt heavier, but he wasn't about to let fear control him. Somewhere amidst the chaos, a thought flashed in his mind. What were these boys thinking? Were they not aware of the line they were crossing? He remembered being young once, exploring the world in reckless abandon. But he also remembered the wisdom of his father, to stand up for what you believe in, to protect your own. In that moment, something shifted. "You want something to eat?" he called out, lowering the barrel slightly to encourage a response. The group hesitated again. Finally, the leader returned, but his tone had softened. "We didn't know. We're so hungry. If you just help us." Harrison's heart twisted at the vulnerability they exhibited, for he recognized that desperation could lead to poor choices. He barked, returning to his authoritative stance. There was a flicker of realization in their eyes. Their anger and bravado melted away, replaced by a shared understanding of their foolishness. They took a small step backward, then another, retreating into the night, shadows blending with the darkness around them. Breathing heavily, Harrison felt the weight of both victory and sorrow. He realized that these youths were products of a broken system, driven to desperate measures. The battle may have ended for now, but the war wasn't over. Days turned into weeks, and Harrison fortified his defenses even further. He installed cameras and motion sensors, ensuring no one could sneak onto his property again. He invested in sturdy locks and reinforced windows, but with every passing day, the worry gnawed at him. Even with these barriers, he couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. Then came a night filled with foreboding. A swell of wind howled through the fields, rattling the trees and creating a cacophony of unsettling noise. The moment felt electric, crackling with the anxiety hanging in the air. Harrison had just finished checking the perimeter when the power flickered and died, plunging the farm into darkness. "Great," he muttered under his breath as he fumbled for the flashlight. Instinct kicked in, and he felt an urgency building. This was no ordinary power outage. Something felt dangerously off. Stepping outside, flashlight in hand, he scanned the area. The stillness around him felt almost alive, as if the night had taken a breath and held it. He felt exposed, vulnerable. The shadows seemed to grow taller, stretching across the ground, dancing as if anticipating a storm to come. That's when he heard it, a faint rustling, not from the nearby trees but from his barn. Harrison froze, heart pounding like a hammer against steel. He whispered to himself, was it just the wind? Or was someone trying to get in? He crept closer to the barn, flashlight cutting through the dense night. The moment he reached the door, he stopped, realizing he was a heartbeat away from confrontation. Every instinct in him screamed to turn around, but he pressed on, slowly opening the barn door. The first thing he noticed was the smell of rancid odor that curled up his nose. He shouted, but his voice felt swallowed by the dark. He stepped inside, illuminating the corner of the barn where he could see someone moving, a shadow shifting quickly, panic in their movements. He ordered, gripping the flashlight tightly as if it could provide him strength. Suddenly, the noise dropped into silence. Harrison's breath caught in his throat, the tension hung thick in the air. Without warning, figures surged forward from the shadows, a swarm of bodies pouring from the dark corners of the barn. Harrison's mind raced. Who were they and what did they want? The leader of the group stepped forward, eyes frantic. "We aren't here to hurt you." But before he could finish, another figure stumbled into view, pushing past the leader like a marionette with severed strings. Their faces were hidden in the darkness, but desperation painted them eerily. Fear surged through Harris, his instincts awakened, adrenaline igniting his body. "Get back!" he shouted, leveling the flashlight at them, beam pulsing wildly. In the confusion, he backed away, trying to create distance, but the sheer number of them was overwhelming. In a split second, the shadows crashed against him like a wave about to break. And as his heart raced, Harrison could feel their intentions twisting in the air, the tension before the storm. They were driven by desperation, yes, but something else lingered, brewing beneath the surface, waiting for a spark. The barn door loomed behind him, and in that infinitesimal moment, Harrison realized this wasn't just about keeping them out anymore. It was about defending what he had built against the impeding chaos that threatened to consume not just his property but his life. And just before everything broke loose, he understood. This moment, this clash, was about to redefine him. As shadows swirled and the storm gathered, Harrison braced for what he knew was coming, standing firm against the tide. The end of one battle was only the beginning of another, and he had to be ready to fight the storm that was rising within.